All right, everyone. Welcome to the Stoa. We got a tight group here with us today, so I'm going to forgo the music. And Sebastian Marshall has returned to the Stoa to continue his awesome Philosopher-in-Residence series. And let there be light at the Stoa, because this will be there will be an interactive portion. And this series is called Bespoke Applied Science: How to Apply the Scientist's Mindset for Wisdom, Practical Wisdom. And it feels like the original Stoa Apocalypse, where a philosopher comes and just sits down, shares some wisdom, and people ask questions about what is bothering them or what's most alive. In last session, we definitely had that quality. So today's going to be 60 to 90 minutes. I'm going to take Sebastian in. He's going to present, and then we'll have some on the painted porch, digital painted porch exchanges. So Sebastian, my friend, welcome back to the Stoa.
Hey, thank you, Peter. First off, everybody, feel free to flip your cameras on, make it a little more lively and interactive. There'll definitely be some time to solve some practical problems together, and thank you for everybody that does that. So yeah, feel free to join the party a little bit and make it more lively along those lines. So we originally titled this series Industrial Philosophy, right? And then Peter's like, yo, Sebastian, like, you're actually doing applied science. And I'm like, yeah, but that sounded, and I was about to be like pretentious. And I'm like, well, I guess industrial philosophy is pretentious too. All right, well, so what we're doing, right, is we're looking at, and we retitled a little bit. And what I did is I accelerated the things I was going to cover last week and this week, simplified a little bit to get through that, so we can make next week whatever we like. If that's highly interactive or problem solving related, or going a little deeper on some of these things. Basic argument behind industrial philosophy is, and I think this is where, if you just glanced at it, if you're in a hurry, you might think, oh, industrial philosophy is something about, business related stuff or management related stuff. Not quite. My idea that I think was an answer to a question I'd looked for like 10 years, which was like, what happened to philosophy? You read people that are like universally regarded as philosophers like Aristotle. This is a different quality than stuff people are doing today. And you read stuff like, Boethius, who was like a Roman who got, he's like senior in government, and story's a little bit mixed, but the general consensus is that he like revealed some like corruption, some like bad affairs going on, but his enemies had more kind of muscle than he did. He wound up getting arrested and sentenced to death. And he wrote the Consolation of Philosophy in his like year of house arrest before being executed. Like a bunch of things that we refer to today, a bunch of phrases and concepts are from Boethius. I came across Boethius because at one point I said, hey, let me try to figure out what the most popular book was every single century in different parts of the world. And the Consolation of Philosophy was, for many centuries in a row, probably the most popular book in the world. Obviously, they didn't have modern ISBN numbers on books and stuff like that to track it, but there's a lot of copies of it that were made around that era. It's very likely the most popular book in the world. So you look at that, and like Boethius has these just like brilliant and beautiful ideas, and it's like very poetic and it's very interesting. It's like, philosophy is just not like that these days. Why? Right? And after like really thinking about this, talking to a lot of people about this for a long time, it seems like a lot of philosophy is now done by people that are just working in academic and theoretical contexts. Sometimes they do really, really good work. But when you look at the people that were doing philosophy before, it was often people that had some industrial thing. They had a profession, and philosophy was something they did on the side. And in their profession, right, things could be right or wrong. Things could be right or wrong. They could be dead sure that something would work in business or in military affairs or in something they were trying to accomplish, and then it like wouldn't turn out the way they thought. And then for more abstract stuff, for more like, what's the right way to live, right? It gave us sort of humility and doubt that you could be dead sure that something is right, but maybe you overlooked a little key detail, right? And you see that quality in even to this day, in people that are in computer science, people that are engineers, people that are in finance. A lot of them are doing what I think is some of the best philosophy, but it's not treated as philosophy in the mainstream, in the academic sense. Very important and really cool. And I think this is just like absolutely a gem that's worth knowing about, is that through basically all of history in the West, right, natural philosophy was always part of science. Natural philosophy. That got broken out and called science in the 1800s, but a chemist or a physicist, right? A chemist or a physicist would be very, very welcome with somebody sitting around and talking about like, hey, what values should we live by? What's epistemology? How do we know what's true? Like what's, how do we be like orderly about what's true with things like logic, like what do words mean and all that sort of stuff, right? So science got broken out from philosophy in the 1800s. And that, I mean, I really think science, natural philosophy was the crown jewel of philosophy. It was the area where you could be right or wrong. You could say, hey, I think turtles lay eggs. Somebody else says, I think turtles give birth to their young life. You go do some marine biology. You go tramp around an island and see whether the turtles are laying eggs or not. And you like get the answer to that question. While you still can't get answers like definitively into what's a great life, I think that training of like going around an island and looking at turtles or like guessing, hey, I think that comet that we saw 7 years ago is going to be back, astronomy, right? I think doing that and trying to make predictions about like what's true and what's false and the ability to be wrong, like gave you the mental tools to be able to be quite a bit more rigorous in the more abstract questions that don't necessarily have right answers. You could nevertheless know that you approach them rigorously, you approach them with certain humility. The first good answer you have isn't good enough for you. You're going to keep going, right? So especially once we went to bespoke applied science, I want to start with the best counter argument against truth. I don't buy this. I love truth. I think truth is great. But, if we're going to be good scientists, I think it's worth even investigating that. The best argument against truth, I think, is Nietzsche's, right? And he said this: the will to truth, which is to tempt us to many a hazardous enterprise, the famous truthfulness of which all philosophers have hitherto spoken with respect. What questions has this will to truth not laid before us? What strange, perplexing, questionable questions? It is already a long story, yet it seems as if it has hardly just commenced. Is it any wonder if we at last grow distrustful, lose patience, and turn impatiently away? That the Sphinx teaches us at last to ask questions ourselves? Who is it really that puts questions to us here? What really is this will of truth in us? In fact, we made a long halt at the question as to the origin of this will, until at last we came to an absolute standstill before yet a more fundamental question. We inquired about the value of this will to truth. Granted that we want truth, why not rather untruth and uncertainty, even ignorance? The problem of the value of truth presented itself before us, or was it we who presented ourselves before the problem? Which of us is the Oedipus here? Which is the Sphinx? So like, I read that and I was like, yeah, it's from Beyond Good and Evil. And it's like, well, darn. Yeah, I suppose we have to answer that. Why do we want to know what's true, right? Why not ignorance or uncertainty or untruth, right? So there's that. Then I wanted to give a second one, and then we'll get into some very practical techniques. David Hume was an English philosopher. He talked about something called the is-ought problem. If we have more cameras on, I would say let's do a show of hands here. Who's is-ought? Who knows the is-ought thing? Yeah, a couple people? All right. So he said this: in every system of morality, so he's talking about morality, right? So a lot of morality will be like, hey, everybody, people get together in cities, they trade, they exchange things, and so on and so forth. They do this and that and this and that and this and that, right? And then this trade happens, and this trade happens, and this trade happens. And therefore, you should be honest and industrious and do a good trader. And therefore, you should help the poor. And therefore, you should obey the rulers or question the rulers or whatever. And he's like, hey, hold on a second. You start with like, okay, people are in a city, they're trading and stuff. Like, we can go check that out. That's like true, right? And then you like get to, and therefore you should do things this way. And he said, hey, wait a second. He said, in every system of morality, which I've hitherto met with, I've always remarked that the author proceeds from some ordinary way of reasoning and establishes the being of a god or makes observations concerning human affairs, when all of a sudden I'm surprised to find that instead of the usual copulations of propositions, is and is not, I meet with no proposition that is not connected with an ought or an ought not. The change is imperceptible, but is, however, of the last consequence. For as this ought or ought not expresses some new relation or affirmation, it's necessary that it should be observed and explained, and at the same time, a reason should be given. for what seems altogether inconceivable, how this new relation can be a deduction from the others, which are entirely different from it. But as authors do not commonly use this precaution, I shall presume to recommend it to the readers, and am persuaded that this small attention would subvert all the vulgar systems of morality. And let us see, the distinctions of vice and virtue is not founded merely on the relations of objects, nor is perceived by reason. So what he's saying there, right? What he's saying there is like, hey, you can mix flour and water and butter, and you heat it up and it makes bread, right? Therefore, we should make very healthy, firm bread. And he's like, wait a second, hold on a second. Like, you do whatever you want with that stuff. You don't need to like make good bread. Like, where does the, right? You could even be like, humans say it's more tasty if the bread is firm. Therefore, we should like, well, hold on, like, why tasty? Maybe we want like not tasty bread. You know, Jewish people intentionally to kind of celebrate their tradition make like kind of not tasty bread. And I'm not throwing shade at anybody that's in the Jewish tradition, but like they intentionally have like not tasty bread is the thing. And so like how do you say, okay, like, hey, if we bake the bread this way, it tastes better, right? It's like, well, maybe we don't want bread that tastes good. Maybe we want like mediocre tasting bread, you know, as a reminder that like, you know, like life is hard and we should respect, you know, people that have come before us and so on and so forth, right? So like, how do you derive from facts how you should live? And this seems to me like part of Nietzsche's argument, right? He's like, yeah, okay, you want all these facts. Well, then you need to arbitrarily pick what you're going to do anyway. So why do you even want the facts? You're just going to pick arbitrarily. It's not exactly what he's saying, but I don't think people would argue that that's a correct enough study of what he's doing, right? So, you know, in session 0, where we kicked off and prepped a little bit in December, I said, hey, you know, let's look at some practical tools. Natural philosophy, now science, was the crown jewel of philosophy, right? And we said, hey, like uncertainty can be a virtue, but then we also said like, hey, okay, like we can actually get good at this stuff, right? We can look at things like experiment, design, interpretation. We can like look at science and like know whether it's good or not. We can build these techniques as lay people. And, you know, my claim was that you could overview this sort of stuff. And if you're, you know, like reasonably on it, you've already got some basis of a little bit of math, you know, just up to like middle school math. You got a little bit of basis in language, a little bit of an understanding of fundamentals of basic science. You can actually look at experiment design, spend 5 to 20 hours with it, be able to read a research paper and know, hey, was this a well put together research paper or not? I recommended Peter Norvig's Warning Signs in Experimental Design or Interpretation. You do things like forecasting statistically to say, hey, how good are our bets here, right? And then you can also just set up like little projects and see if they go the way you want them to go. You can try to get calibrated correctly on those, right? After that, we went into session 1, right? We went into session 1, and you know, we really kind of worked out a bunch of these techniques as much as possible. In session 2, we said, hey, you could do analysis and synthesis. You could take things apart and put them back together. So you can evaluate the pieces of something. Systems behave differently than just their pieces, right? But you can apply those techniques to be able to study a problem, right? So what I'd like to do today is I'd like to talk about 3 things to get around, or at least to clarify the problem that Nietzsche put and Jung put forwards, right? So I think there's 3 things you could do, and I think the first one is obvious, the second one is not obvious, and the third one is seems like it should be obvious, but not a lot of people do it, right? And I think this can be like hyper practical and maybe like says, hey, go like study and apply these things a little bit, right? One of the challenges with, hey, what do I want to do? Where do I want to live? What job do I want to take? I got invited to something. Somebody I like invited me to the type of event I normally don't like. Should I go? Right? You know, you like your friend Joe or your friend Sally. They're a great person. They're inviting you to either like dancing or board games. You either don't like dancing or don't like board games. You like Joe or Sally. Do I go to this event that I'm not into? Right? Like I like Joe or I like Sally. I like dancing or I don't like dancing. I like board games. I don't like board games, whatever. Like you're being invited to an event you don't like by somebody you do like. Like, do I go to that? And like, this is like, I think a very good case, right? Like if philosophy can't help you answer, should I go to this? I mean, like there's very technical abstract parts of philosophy, but I think this type of question, like what should I do on Friday night, is a question that you should be able to think about kind of clearly. And I feel like we get opportunities like this like all the time, right? Like you're in a really safe job, you get offered a job that you like might not excel in a very competitive industry, right? My mother does finance for the US government, and the general consensus is that if you get into finance and you go work for the government for a few years, you're very in a good position to go jump to go working at like one of the major banks, to Goldman Sachs or something. They're very happy to have somebody that saw the regulatory side of things. But if you're in government for like many years, you're like 15 or 20 years in government, the bank might be like, hey, I'm not sure you can keep up with our pace and how we do things anymore, right? So if you're 3-5 years into civil service in the United States, right, it's like really well established. There's like a promotion path. If you're not like a total idiot and you like do a decent job and don't commit any like egregious crimes, like you're not going to get fired working for the US government. It's like once you're in, you're good, right? You gotta do your job, you gotta show up. I actually think the US civil service is like pretty good. I've been around a lot of the world. Like I think it's Americans just like to we like to complain that things could be better, but like they could be a lot worse. Like I think the civil service of the US is pretty good, right? But like somebody will have a choice. You know, they go to a pretty decent school, they study well, they get a job in a regulatory agency or, you know, an independent agency doing some finance related stuff. And then, you know, they get an offer from Goldman Sachs or Citibank. Pays a lot more, it's a lot more stressful. And it's also like, if you don't perform, they'll let you go in anywhere from 1 to 3 months. Should I take that? Right? Because the position that you had with the government might not be available. They obviously need to have, you know, regulators, investigators, and whatever, right? So your position might get filled, you might not be able to go back. So it's like, hey, do I want to strike off into this like risky thing? It pays more, might be more exciting, might be less exciting, right? My colleagues there might be really exciting. They might be like ruthless jerks, right? I kind of know what I got now. Should I do this other thing that might be better, might be worse, right? And it's like, how do we think about stuff like that, right? So for these types of questions, should I go dancing if I don't like dancing, go to board games if I don't like board games, I'm invited by somebody I like? Should I switch jobs from like a safe job, like pays the bills, totally cool, it's totally respectable, my colleagues are like totally decent people, to another place where I don't know what my colleagues are going to be like, it pays more, it's more stressful, might be more exciting, right? I'm really safe. My next 50 years of employment are locked down. If I stay here, if I jump there, I might be out of work in 3 months and no going back, right? Should I do that or not, right? And I think there's 3 techniques that you can use. And I think this is where the natural philosophy and then the developments on natural philosophy are useful, and the philosophical thing and the practical side of philosophy, like, hey, let's make good decisions. So 3 things. First one's like, okay, really, Sebastian? Like, this is pretty obvious. I think for statistical things, some things are statistical, right? I think you use empiricism and data gathering. I know this is like the most obvious thing in the world, right? So, you know, like if you're thinking of going into a particular line of business, you know, it's worth looking at, hey, like how often do people succeed and fail there? How much am I like the other people that go into that field? Like, what are my odds? You know, if you want to go try to commercialize some research or some idea that you had, like what are the likelihoods of it happening, right? I know a gentleman who did a PhD thesis, on some hard engineering science sort of stuff. And then when he graduated, he decided, instead of looking to get a postdoc or looking to get into teaching, he said, you know, I think some of the stuff that you could do with some of the stuff that me and the other people that I collaborated with would be useful for the world. I don't think anyone's going to build the actual engineering devices that are useful with what we do. He figured out ways to make lights and lighting conditions that help plants grow by simulating the lighting conditions in other parts of the world. So certain plants will only grow in certain parts of the world in a certain way. And some of that is the sun level, whether you're closer to the equator or further north or whatever. And he found ways to make lights that simulate and actually do give the plants the light profile that they would need to grow in Africa or in the far north or whatever. So you can grow plants in a greenhouse that normally wouldn't grow in that part of the world. It's pretty cool stuff, right? And he said, well, let me go for that, right? And, you know, whatever, at that point, he would have been, you know, a guy in his, you know, late 20s or whatever. Yeah, avocados in Sweden or like northern plants that need like a more dim light profile close to the equator is even the harder one, is that they need some degree of light, but too much light, they ain't gonna like it very much. And the Canadian government does something where it'll give you grants to commercialize science. I believe off the top of my head that some years ago, there was about $50,000 was a grant. So they're like, hey, just like go crazy with this. We think like a lot of these won't work. If some of these create new scientific industry in Canada, create employment, create cool things, build stuff that's actually useful for society, okay, the tax revenue will come back, employment will go up, there's income taxes. So they did the math and thought that this was a good idea, right? So I presume he's a very, very smart guy, a very, very motivated, disciplined, insightful guy, joy to work with, nice guy. I presume that he had other offers in teaching in academia and maybe going and doing the science company where the company could fail, might have lost some momentum. You're out of the academic space. If you want to spend 2, 3, 4 years on it and it fails, there you go. And also, am I going to like it or not? You're having an academic life. There's various stresses and pressures of it, but it's very different than a commercial market, which has a variety of there's a variety of stuff you got to deal with in business that you don't necessarily have to deal with in academia and vice versa, right? So I think with statistical things hey, what are the likely profiles of this business? What have other people who've done commercial research? How often do these things work? Let's get data on that, right? If I absolutely want to go do some activity that I can't do when I'm raining in a place where it rains sometimes, let's check the weather and see if it's going to rain if I go there to do this thing, right? Okay, that's pretty obvious. What I think is not obvious, and I think is extremely powerful and needs to be played around with and studied a little bit to do, is I think a lot of times around decision making, things seem very messy where there's thousands of inputs potentially going into something. If you think about the shape of even a week of your life, if you tried to define all the variables, what'd you have for breakfast and at what time and how big was your breakfast, and what'd you have for lunch and at what time and how big was your lunch, and then dinner, and who'd you meet with and how'd you spend your activities in what sequence of time. And if you're sitting down and you want to write some fiction, how long do you give it? And if the ideas don't come, do you take a walk or do you stick with it? And if you're stuck, do you read another book for inspiration? And right? When you think about it, if you try to write out equations for how somebody spent an entire week or data points of it, thousands, millions. And when you start thinking about the combinations of I could skip breakfast today and have a big lunch, right? It rapidly gets into billions, trillions, or more combinations of how you could spend a week, right? This can be very, very tough to navigate and doesn't seem amenable to scientific techniques. Well, okay, data gathering and stuff, cool. There's been data's been on the rise for hundreds of years, has accelerated. Last 20 years really has taken off, right? But this one I think is really, really valuable. And I don't think people use it enough, which is you can use tautologies to help simplify a decision. A tautology is something that is by definition true. There's no arguing about it, right? It's by definition true. I think the most famous one, though it's not identified as something that we can use as a blueprint, I think the most famous one is when Aristotle talks about the forms of government, right? So Aristotle said, hey, when you got a group of people, some decisions are being made by some people as to what's going on in a city, in a group, whatever, right? Somebody's deciding we're putting the temple of Athena there or we're putting it there, right? If we've already decided we're building a temple, but we're picking a site. We're building it on the edge of the city, we're building it in the center of the city. Somebody's making that decision. Somebody's making the calls. So we've already made the decision to put up a temple of Athena. Where is it going? Somebody's making this call. And he said, this call could be made by one person, or it could be made by a group of people, but not everyone, or it could be made by everyone. And he said, if you apply it to government, that's monarchy, that's oligarchy or aristocracy, and that's democracy. Right? A little more complex than that. But that's a tautology, right? In any group of people, if there's 20 people, and the group needs to decide, where are we going for dinner? Right? The call can be made by one person. We're going to Thai food. Right? Maybe Kyle, who has his camera on. Maybe it's Kyle gets to choose where we go. Maybe Kyle takes everybody's opinion. Maybe Kyle doesn't. Maybe Kyle's I want Thai food, so we're getting Thai food. Do you know what I mean? So it'd be a kind of a monarchic thing. Could be, could be aristocratic or oligarchic. Maybe Andrew Ty and Ty here, Ty White. Maybe we respect that Andrew, Ty White, and Kyle have the best judgment around food. They know all the good restaurants. They've been to more restaurants. They've got a bit of a Epicurean leaning thing going on at the Stoa, right? So maybe like we'll let those three decide. They'll get together and chat what would be a good restaurant for everybody, right? And the rest of us will like sit it out and let them make a call, right? Or maybe we have a vote or some other group decision-making mechanism where like everybody gets to weigh in on where to go to eat. What's really interesting about this is there's no opinionated, this is the right way to do things. And what Aristotle's saying, he's not saying monarchy's better, democracy's better, aristocracy's better. He's not saying that. He's saying like, look, in a group of people, one person's making the call, some but not all the people are making the call, all the people are making the call. Right? It's a tautology. It's definitionally true. Right? Like you can't argue with that. That's correct. Right? There could be like, okay, there's like a setup where like some group of people weigh the options and somebody makes the final choice, like more hybrid advanced stuff, right? And you'll see that with like Senate's and the president's veto power or whatever. So you can like build on that, but that's like the fundamental like unit of like who's making the calls, like one person, some people, or many people. I think this can be used to greatly simplify, right? To greatly simplify decisions and to classify things to then make good decisions, right? So there's some forms of employment that we could call are like super secure, right? Sure, okay, maybe the US government just like winds it up at some point and says we're going out of business, or maybe the whole conventions in academia change and like, hey, the tenure thing is off, good luck, right? Unlikely, right? Unlikely. So you could be in a civil service role or a tenured professorship role, and you could say that's like a extremely secure employment, you know, where like it's, you could define it formally so that it's, you know, some definition of extremely secure. And then there's like not secure, and then there's like degrees of not secure that's statistical, right? But you could say, hey, okay, there's like secure or not secure. There's like generating income like on your own accord, not getting paid, right? By anybody else, not getting wages. And then there's like varieties of wages, right? You could say that compensation is fixed or variable or some mix of fixed and variable, right? So you can put down the tautological lines. You start your own business, right? You start your own business, right? You're generating income. You know, I mean, maybe your corporation or entity pays a salary, but in the beginning, if it's just you, right? That's, you know, you're self-employed, you're not getting a salary. There's no predictability there. You're getting statistical income, right? You're getting variable income. If you go take a academic professorship, yeah, maybe there's like a little grant or a colloquium or like a award or something that can put some variable in it, but basically your compensation is fixed. And so you can start putting down tautologies like, hey, I'm either getting the same amount of money every month independent of my performance in this job, or I'm not. And that's like true, right? And then, yeah, okay, and like little edges, okay, but there could be a little award or something, so it could be a small percentage of it, and so on and so forth. So I think identifying tautologies is really powerful, right? I think identifying tautologies is really powerful and can simplify things, right? So it's like you could say, hey, like I will either eat before I work on my writing, while I'm doing my writing, or after I'm doing my writing, right? And then you're now working with things that are true or false from like a thing. Identifying which tautologies produce a lot of leverage and which ones are interesting is where this takes some work. But you can oftentimes simplify very complex decisions into it's either this or this definitionally. And then what are the characteristics of those things? So this can kind of help with the universality in decision making a little bit, right? Takes some work, but it's very powerful. And then identifying values trade-offs where those two things aren't possible, right? So I think whenever you have to make a decision, whenever there's not like you're just doing it one way, like your house is on fire, get out, right? It's fairly straightforward. Most of the decisions we actually think about, we reason about like what's a nice life. You know, sometimes somebody in their early 20s meets somebody that's like a really wonderful romantic partner and they have to like make a decision. Do I want to like pursue a marriage now, or I got a job offer in another country? That would very likely lead to us splitting up. Like this person seems like really nice and really cool. What do I want to do? Like these are like the hard decisions in life, right? And you know, you can look at things that are factual either through like a statistical lens, right? A statistical lens, right? Like, hey, like for people that get married at this age, like how likely are they to get divorced? How similar am I to them? And so on and so forth, right? If somebody goes into business, like how likely to succeed? You can get that information with data, right? For things that are just facts, I feel like, again, weirdly, I feel like these things are like under interacted with. The attributes of things that are just true, and identifying them is really powerful. And so you can use tautologies to say like, hey, in this decision, it has this set of like factual profile, right? Here I have income that will fall within a narrow range regardless of my performance. Here, the income is completely no floor, no ceiling, right? That's a tautology. Then, okay, you go through statistics on the uncertain part of it. You could say like, hey, in this condition, I'm married. In this condition, I'm not married. Do you know what I mean? I know that sounds like really, really like, this can sound very obvious, but I think it can help tremendously, right? You could put down things like, I either did writing this day or did not do writing this day, right? So, and then you can do with like goal setting, like, hey, like, what's a day worth writing worth to me? What's a day with any writing worth to me? Like, how much is that worth in a non-writing day? If you get invited to the Friday thing, right? Dancing or board games or whatever, right? There's a question in chat. Let me take a look at this to see. We'll take a lot of questions at the end and can look at practical problems as well. But can you break that down in the going dancing situation? Sure, right? So you could start with, as basic as this is, right? You could start with, there are Friday evenings where I like go out and meet people I don't know, and there are Friday evenings where I don't. And there are Friday evenings where I do a guaranteed activity I like, and there are Friday evenings where I don't, right? And so you can identify universally, you're either like meeting people or not, and you're doing something that you beforehand guaranteed that you've liked in the past or not, right? And then there's statistical attributes of like, maybe you go out to dancing or board games, not because you care about the thing, but you know that Sam is a great person or Joe's a great person or whatever, right? Like, Joe's a great person. Joe probably knows other great people. I'd like to make a new friend. I'm not really into board games. That's statistical as to whether you meet somebody or not. And you could say like, hey, what are the odds? Who went in the past? How many people might have connected with them, so on and so forth, right? And then there's value trade-offs, right? Like, what's the value of like doing a new activity, right? What's the value of doing a new activity? Or an activity you don't like, but you might meet great people, versus like reading a book at home that you normally do like, right? This is the is-ought thing. There's no like, this is the right answer. The right answer won't derive. The right answer like won't derive from the facts. That's right? Like, you could be like, in this way, you could say, hey, if we run our city this way, tax yields will be higher, the security will be higher, people will be healthier, we're less likely to get invaded, the crops will be better. And like, it just looks better in every single way. And that still doesn't derive out until you get some principle of like, that's what we want, that you therefore need to do it that way, right? First off, you might be overlooking something, right? Maybe that's some sort of like regulated thing where like the government chooses everybody's profession. It's like relatively proven that for this group of people, it would like work pretty good. And it's like, well, I don't know, this freedom thing's important to me. Do you know what I mean? Even if the freedom thing leads to less, or the other way around, you do the freedom thing and like there's some, some downsides to that are bad, and some upsides in some other places. You can't definitively answer based on any set of facts that we should do this or should do that. You have to specify the first ought condition, right? Well, there you go. So you could create a hierarchy, right? And like, that's one answer to it. But I wanted to, by the way, I've actually done that in some cases. But what I want to do is I want to talk about some techniques that we can use to navigate these three things. So I'm saying there's three things here, right? For anything statistical, like, hey, what are the odds it works or doesn't work? You know what I mean? If there's some activity that's like reasonably safe, but a little bit dangerous, like going surfing when it's very, 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 very lightly stormy and unlikely to get very stormy. Do you know what I mean? Like, what are the odds that it like I'm getting pulled out to sea and I'm having a real rough time out there and potentially getting in a lot of trouble while surfing? It's like cool if it's a little stormy to go surfing. If it gets very stormy is not cool. So it's like, statistics, right? Data, right? But there's like tautologies, right? Like, hey, if I go out there on this type of day, right, I'm gonna have this experience, like there's challenging surfing, or like I surfed or I didn't. And then there's like, I got some challenge in my surfing or didn't. And then like I went into a situation that could potentially be unsafe or didn't. And then the unsafe thing will happen or won't. And, you could see how you can then model the potential value of the different branches. Doesn't say which one you should choose, right? And then identifying values trade-offs specifically because those behave differently than facts, right? So after this, I just want to throw a bunch of techniques at you. I can link up some notes on this. A macro thing that I think I've tried to get across this entire time during this entire session, it's a great honor and a pleasure to be here. A macro thing that, if you take nothing else, take this, right, is that there are some very simple techniques around thinking or action, knowledge, mental models, equations that you could spend 5 to 20 hours to learn. Usually it's 5 to 10 that will like make your thinking better forever. Right? And like, I don't know why people don't do this more often. I don't know why people don't do this more often. We run an internal training, it takes about 2 hours. We run an internal training every week at Ultra Working for our staff. And it's like really like a highlight of the week. People like it a lot. The last one we did, just like not for any particular reason, it's just what we happened to do last week, was on how to do modeling of a system where you have a goal within the system, right? So we took a battle royale style video game, like a Fortnite style video game where there's like 50 people jump into the game, right? And like the last person alive, it's a shooter game, so nobody's actually getting hurt, right? You jump out of a plane, get some guns. There's a random number generator that determines what guns when you open a chest and stuff. I only played Fortnite for like 10 minutes myself, but I'm familiar with what's going on. I've played some other games of that genre, right? You win that game by being the last person alive in the game. How do you model that game? And we give people 2 hours to explore how to model that game, right? We gave them 2 hours to explore how to model that game. And I said there's a variety of like correct models, the game, see if you can figure it out. So, I put some primers down for people and people engaged and explored. Some of it was groups, some of it was solo, people had fun. And like one absolutely correct model of the game is the game happens over time. So in the game, the battlefield, the video game battlefield like shrinks in the game over time. There's like a storm and it shrinks. And so eventually the game ends, right? After like a certain amount of minutes, 7 minutes, 10 minutes, or whatever, the game is over, right? So you can model, it's absolutely correct that game happens over time, right? That game happens over time. You can say like this many minutes passed, right? And so you can say the game has like not started, then it's ended. Apologies, right? Then you can use statistics to go through and say when people have jumped out of the plane in the game. So in the game, you jump out of a plane, you can choose where you land on a map in the game, right? Like when people jump out of the plane, they start with no weapons and they have to find the weapons on the ground, right? So the very, very early game, nobody has weapons. And like your whole set of gear and stuff is like less developed, right? Once you get into the mid game, everybody's probably found some stuff that they want to use, right? But there's still a lot of players left. And then in the end game, and so it behaves differently, right? In almost all battle royale games, a lot of fighting early when you haven't gotten your weapons yet is like wrong, because like you're not building up resources enough, and if you take out the other person, you don't get very much stuff from them, right? And then so on. Another model of games like that is you can look at your offensive output at different distances and your defensive, like how much you can block damage, right? So if I've got a shotgun and you've got a pistol and we're at close range and a shotgun's better than a pistol, I can damage you for it's like math, right? What's really interesting is the most important model of these like multi-agent single winner games is a model that you can learn and apply everywhere, which is win equity. So you can evaluate every decision in a game like that based on win equity. So assuming everybody's equal skill and 50 people start the game, you have a 2% chance of winning. Right? When you find a really good piece of armor or a good gun, can be tough to model this, but there's ways to, but it's a little challenging. Nevertheless, if somebody finds nothing when they drop and get no gear, maybe they go to get some gear and somebody else picks up a gun and shoots them up a little bit, they lose some health and they don't get any gear, their win equity has gone down. If you find like the super good gun set that you really like running, maybe it goes up. For every player that gets eliminated, everyone's win equity goes up. Right? Everyone's win equity goes up. So what's the value of like getting into a fight with somebody in the game? You can model that through win equity. And like, this is the correct way. This is a correct way to do multi-agent single winner games, right? So like if there's 3 people left, it's really obvious in this one. There's 3 people left. Only one person can win. 3 people left, only one person can win. The ideal thing for you, if you just want to win, if you don't want to have like fun, flashy, cool plays and show them off on Twitch or whatever, like if you just want to win, absolutely the ideal thing to happen when there's 3 people left is you sit it out. They shoot it up and use up their ammo and resources fighting each other. The person with the rocket launcher uses all their rockets. Do you know what I mean? And one of them kills, the other one has 20% health left, right? Your win equity was 33% if you all came in about the same skill with the same stuff, right? It ends with one of them drops. Their 33% win equity spreads out between the two of you. So it would be 50-50. So you would have gotten 17% win equity, right? But if they're at 20% health, maybe you're 95% to beat them in the fight. So actually, they lowered their win equity and just gave all of it to you by eliminating somebody else, right? So you think about that, right? Like going and taking out an opponent, like they could have taken you out, has like lowered your win equity so incredibly much. So you want to play it kind of cagey. Like if one person like overextends themselves and you can take them out cleanly, okay, fine. Otherwise, you want to be like taking some shots and like moving around and like retreating and like not getting in the like lockdown fight. You know what I mean? Where the other person sits it out to the end. It's like the Mexican standoff thing in movies like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, right? So 2 people start shooting it out. One of them gets hit. Both their guns are empty. One of them drops. Third person's just like, okay, I win now. Do you know what I mean? Right? So these types of things are available in the world. And there's actually some really, really good math on things like win equity. So the meta and macro point is these things for clarifying your thinking. A lot of them are techniques arising from industry, from science, from statistics, from what used to be called natural philosophy, that can then be applied to decision-making in life, right? And I think these can also be applied to very abstract things, like, should I take a job that pays less and helps people more? Should I do Doctors Without Borders, or should I go to this very prestigious medical place that like pays very well and is very prestigious? Right? Should I get involved in medical research and developing new medical science and medical treatments, or should I be a practicing physician? Should I take more time and become a specialist as a physician that does brain surgery instead of general medicine, but then I have to do more studies and stuff like that, right? These are like really important questions. And I think you can use different techniques to at least clarify a lot the answers. And when you get to the values part of it, to separate those out. We'll talk a little more about that in a second, right? So here's some techniques we haven't covered yet. A very, very simple one. I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to spend 5 to 10 hours at some point learning this. You know, if you would spend a Saturday, just like you know, watching some reruns of a TV show or watching some generic entertaining YouTube, you could spend a Saturday getting into this a little bit and exploring it, and it's really useful. Expected value, right? People that have done any sort of gambling or wagering have come across expected value. People that haven't didn't. People that engage with the stock market might or might not have formally dealt with the term expected value, right? But have at least engaged with it probably, right? So expected value is like if we have money involved in a situation, usually gambling, playing poker, right? Sometimes, you know, in poker, there's like you get your cards in poker. Most variants of poker, you get your cards, and then oftentimes there's common cards on the board that anyone can use. Like in Texas Hold'em, you get 2 cards, 5 cards come out on the board, right? At the end of the thing, you flip your cards over. If your cards are better, you win. But the goal is not to win hands in poker, it's to win money, right? So a lot of times you can choose to call a bet when you know you're losing, when you know that based on how they're playing, they're beating me, because like the next cards that come up give you a statistical chance of winning. I remember the first time, I think it was the first time I ever went to a casino. It was the first or second time I ever went to a casino. I went to Foxwoods Casino in Connecticut. I played a little poker. It was the poker boom. Like they were showing poker on ESPN, which is the American sports channel. Back then it was like really hot for like a minute in the United States. And I played some poker when I was in college, right? I remember the first time I went to a casino, like one of the first few hands after I sat down at Foxwoods, live in person, you got chips, people are walking around with free vodkas and stuff. Kind of interesting environment. When I was younger, I'm like, and I don't drink anymore, but I used to drink. When I was younger, I was like, oh, this is great. You could sit down and spend very little money gambling and just drink for free. Like what a great deal. You could totally exploit the casino. Wow, I'm so much smarter than them. They've thought this through. They've thought this through. The bottom shelf vodka is not statistically a great bet. Like there's no free lunch or free Stolichnia or whatever to drink, right? One of my first hands at Foxwoods, this was like a cool experience. I'm not bragging because it's like good luck. one of my first hands, I sat down. I was like literally in the first few hands I played. It might have been the first one, but it was like at least in the first 3 to 5. This is many years ago, right? I got dealt something like 6-7, I think, of diamonds, right? And like 3 or 4 people in front of me went all in and put all their money on the table, and I just put $100 down. So I had $100 of poker chips in front of me, and I'm like, if 3 or 4 people are all in, they probably all have like aces and kings and stuff like that, right? So they're probably duplicating each other's hands. 6-7 can make a flush, can make a straight, can make like a weird 2 pair, and like a bunch of people put their money in. I didn't do the odds rigorously, but I called with my like $100. Like, it got wild. There's like 5 or 6 people got in. My thing did happen to hit. I don't remember if it made a straight or 2 pair or something. Something wasn't the flush. I remember it wasn't the flush. And like, yeah, then I had like $700 in front of me. So I'm like, this gambling thing's freaking awesome. You know, but that was a good bet from expected value, even though like if the game ended without flipping more cards over, yeah, like the 6-7 wasn't getting it done. Somebody did indeed have like pocket aces or pocket kings or whatever. There was some high stuff out there, right? So that's expected value. That's like this bet, this engagement with reality, this action is going to fail. I am going to like be out $100, 70, 80, whatever % of the time. 20% of the time I'm getting $700. I put in $100, I get a 20% chance of $700. I come out ahead, right? So you multiply. Expected value isn't everything though. And this is where like I feel like beginner people that have learned beginner expected value get into trouble. Variance also matters, right? So there's something called the St. Petersburg paradox. Have people heard about this? Yeah, this is neat. This is neat. This is crazy neat, actually. The St. Petersburg paradox is a paradox involving a game of flipping a coin where the expected payoff of the theoretical lottery game approaches infinity, but nevertheless seems to be worth only a very small amount to the participants, right? So the way this game runs is you join this gambling game, right? And you win $1. Like every time they flip a coin, you win some number of money, like $1, right? And then they flip the coin again. If it comes up, so they flip a coin. If it's heads, you get $1, right? Then if it's heads, if it's tails, you lose, the game's over. If it comes up heads, you get $1. If it's heads, they flip the coin again. If it's heads again, you get $2. If it's tails, you get $1. There's no, like, you don't have to quit. It's not like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or whatever. Like, you don't have to quit. You get whatever. When it's tails, the game ends and you get whatever the money is, right? If it comes up heads on $2, they flip the coin again. If it lands heads, you get $4. If it's tails, it ends. They flip the coin again. Again, if it's tails, you get your $4. If it's heads, you get $8 and another flip. Expected value of that's actually technically infinity. It's an infinitesimally small percentage chance of getting, I mean, it's not infinity because the bank, the casino is going to run out of money, but it's, you know, with somebody with infinite money, that's an infinite money bet, but it's extremely unlikely, right? 50% that you get the first dollar, 25% you get the second dollar, 12.5, you know, you win the third round. It gets to a small number pretty quickly, right? So it winds up being like not that much, right? So what that looks at is like, hey, variance, right? A small percentage chance of infinity is like, I might rather have $100 in my pocket than a small percentage chance of infinity, even though infinity is, any percent of infinity is bigger than $100, right? So that looks at variance. There's a related concept that I'm not even going to try to explain, that if you don't like this stuff a lot, don't bother. But if you do, you can look at ergodicity, right? Ergodicity, yeah. Ergodicity, the very quick version of ergodicity says that does it matter what order things happen in? Does it matter what order things happen in, basically? I'm way oversimplifying it, but does it matter what order things happen in? So your first, like for your first job out of college, you could start a business or you could get a job. Does it matter if you go bust in that first year? If your business doesn't succeed and you're broke at the end of a year, does that like screw up your opportunities the year after? So does your success in one year predict your success the next year? Right? So like, let's say that any given year, you could take a 10% chance of making $1 million, which is worth $100,000, or a guaranteed $50,000, right? If you like what you're doing, you're not going to get demoralized and bummed out. You like both of the options equally, and you just want to optimize for money, then if having a year where you go for the 10% shot of $1 million, right? And it fails, which it will 90% of the time, means you can try again next year and next year and next year and next year and next year. You should just take the 10% shot at $1 million forever. If you run out of cash, if you run out of savings, if you have to quit, or if you get like demoralized or burned out, then you should then think about it very carefully and maybe do the 50,000. Right? So the expected value of 10% of $1 million, right? The expected value of 10% of $1 million is more than 50,000 straight, right? But so like if you already had $1 million and your annual expenses are like 50,000, you like both of these roles equally, you don't get demoralized, you're going to work for a sufficient number of years that you get a sample set on it. It's like enough, it's not like a 1 year thing, which is like questionable, but like you could fit the next 50 years of your career. Somebody comes to you right now and they said, hey, the next 50 years of your career, you can take a shot, 10% shot, $1 million every single year of those careers. If you're not going to run out of cash and you like the things equally and you don't get bummed out in the failure case, yeah, sure. I'll take an expected value of $100,000 a year. If you've got 2 years of living expenses only, right? And then like the options are way worse at the end of it, then maybe you take the 50,000, right? So you can learn these techniques and saying, hey, is this ergodic or not, right? So some bets like look good, right? But they don't ignore that if the bet fails, then you're in trouble, right? I'm super simplifying, but ergodicity if you're into this. Diminishing returns, right? Diminishing returns says like, hey, if you're really thirsty, like kind of getting in trouble thirsty, you know what I mean? You're dehydrated, that like a half glass of water is worth a whole lot. A full glass of water is worth more than that, but less. A jug of water is still considerably valuable, and like a whole fire truck worth of water is like not really more valuable than like a jug of water, right? So that's diminishing returns, right? So it's like when some condition has met, when I have like enough water to drink for like the next couple of days, I'm good, right? So if you're camping out in the middle of the desert for 2 days, like enough water to cover all 2 of those days is like really valuable. Enough to be like a little bit thirsty is like, okay, going to full water would be better. Having a little bit of extra water is good. Who knows, maybe you want to clean something or you spill a little bit or something, right? Having, full water trucks full of water is worthless, right? So a lot of times things have a diminishing returns profile in life. Where you can see that these things start to get interesting is like, I know this sounds like obvious and kind of stupid when I put it this way, but people don't do this very often. If you have enough friends that there's always somebody around to hang out spontaneously, if you want to hang out with somebody, that's like pretty valuable. If you don't have that, then going to a random event where you don't really like dancing or board games or whatever might be more valuable because you're moving towards the condition where you've met enough people. There's always somebody to hang out with. So you move to a new city. I think people do this intuitively to some extent, but they don't think about it, right? You move to a new city. Yeah, you should do more random stuff that you might not enjoy. That's more statistical until you like know enough people. There's always somebody around school that you like to hang out with, right? Sometimes one option statistically dominates another, right? So like there's really, really, really funny things, right? Sometimes you go to a university and it's like, if you major in mathematics, you can also pick up a computer science dual major like for free with some elective classes you were going to take otherwise. But if you do computer science, you can't go the other way in math, right? No. Stuff like this. I'm trying to find like non-contrived examples. They're weird, but there's like a lot of them, right? There's like weird, but there's like a lot of them in the world, right? So like Harvard has a joint JD, lawyer, Juris Doctorate lawyer, joint JD PhD program. A lot of universities do. At any given point, you could drop the JD or the PhD and just do the other one. Whereas if you get into just one of them, right, you don't automatically get entrance into law school, right? So it would strike me that don't waste your time and like write the essays for the philosophy department and take the exams for the law department. Like don't waste your time if you don't want them. But if you're like really not sure as to whether like studying the nature of law and advancing legal theory and jurisprudence or like practicing law is better, absolutely. And like, double check, don't disrespect anyone, don't take the opportunity away from anybody else or whatever. But like all else being equal and you're a good candidate, yeah, you get, whatever, a year or two of optionality. by entering the joint program, right? It's statistically dominated on some factors or some trade-offs, right? There's a lot of things out in the world, like a surprising amount of things where there's some statistical dominance at play where one option is just straight better than the other one, right? I had a funny one. I went to a restaurant. I went to a restaurant the other day, and it was like just like whatever, like middle class sandwiches, burgers type thing. And it turned out in front of the restaurant, they had like a family pack where they'll sell you like 3 burgers or sandwiches and 3 side dishes and some drinks and whatever. And I looked at it and like, this was bizarre. I looked at it and the price of the family pack was like priced really cheap to go. It was like about the same price as like 2 sandwiches and 1 side dish. The only reason you wouldn't get the family pack was if you were worried that you'd like eat more stuff or you were uncomfortable throwing the stuff away or like taking it home or whatever, right? So like it was like statistically dominated to get the cool, I'll get 3 sandwiches, 3 side dishes, 3 drinks over like 2 sandwiches and a side, right? Like, yeah, this stuff happens. They want to, presumably different people, like it's like the standard pricing people came up with the standard pricing menu. And then some people wanted to have like a banger of a commercial to get new people into the restaurant, right? So presumably different people came up with it and they created an offer that was just like way better. So you can take that. You can, with tautologies, you can specify what you're going to do in contingencies, right? So you could say, if X happens, I will do Y. If not X happens, I will do Z, right? So like, this is pretty cool, right? Like you can actually model out, hey, like, okay, if I'm in a civil service role, if I stay here or whatever, I'm staying here. If I go off to take a job in a big investment competitive bank, right? If my performance is looking bad in 2 or 3 months, I'll do this. If it's looking good, I'll do that. So you can like pre-line up the decisions that you're going to make. All right. And then three last ones on the is-ought thing. At some point you can look to generate, I'm not going to go into this, but you could look to generate like, here's my canonical morality that all decisions will flow from. This is very easy if somebody's a member of a traditional religion with a well codified doctrine. It's handled this for people for a long time. Trying to make your own, if you don't have one, is like a big freaking project that like probably will have some holes in it. So I don't think it's to be done lightly. In the absence of doing that, where I think this is cool is explicitly identifying the trade-offs. And this is where the statistical, analytical, and scientific techniques help, right? In tautology X, we get A, B, and C for sure. And the other one, we get D, E, F. These things cancel. These things are statistically dominated, but this is the thing. Like, this is where it's different, right? This job pays more and is higher stress, right? So you can kind of cancel out variables and look at things and define things. This is that, and this is that. When you actually do this, by the way, sometimes there's some like really interesting decisions you can come up with, right? So like, you know, if you get an offer coming out of college to go work somewhere, but you want to do your own side business, you might tell them, hey, I really want to do this side business. Can I like get a tentative offer on hold for 6 months and keep you updated? Like there's a lot of stuff like that available that might be available in the moment. Like you might be thinking, I need to say yes or no to this thing, right? And the problem is if I say no, there's the ergodicity thing, there's expected value thing, right? If this thing is not off the ground pretty quickly, like I'm going to take Pokemon cards and like spray paint them in a weird way to make remix Pokemon card art. Maybe it'll have a big market. Maybe people really like my spray paint Pokemon cards. You'll know pretty quickly whether there's anything there or not. You know, saying, hey, you know, please hold off. Architectural studio, and it's great that you want me. I really just feel compelled to spray paint this Charizard. Can I take this job in 6 months if people don't want my super sparkly Charizard? And, you know, like people, I mean, they might be like, no, but they also might be like, all right, great. Like, yeah, go for it, right? And so like, hey, you want to know if it could work. You don't want to be freaking broke. It is easier in the middle of a recruiting cycle when people are graduating college to get employment as a general consensus. So you could do stuff like that. By having techniques to simplify things, right? So again, like how's your day run, right? How's your week run? Has trillions of permutations of how it could run when you actually sit and do it, right? But when you get to tautologies of like, I either wrote every day this week or I didn't, and what's the value of a week that I wrote every single day? Is there something there, right? Then you can start saying, okay, like here's the value of like I did this writing. Here's the value of like I did my fitness. And sometimes this can take like a bunch of complex decisions and simplify them. Like, hey, if I'm always doing my workouts, or I'm always doing my writing, or I'm always doing my meditating, like life is just better. And I can weigh everything against what's the chance it screws that up, right? And to take it a very slightly bit further, sometimes you can abstract the values. I feel like this takes a lot of experience. Like, I feel like if somebody is like 18, it's kind of hard to do this because, like what is creativity, what is freedom, and things like that. I feel like you just need a lot of data and a lot of practical experience. And on that note, I don't know the edges of people here and of anybody watching this on YouTube later. The one thing that I've learned over time where like experience really, really does help, because I'm like not a experienced seniority person. You can absolutely have more unique experiences and reflect on them more deeply than other people to build maturity faster. I've like absolutely seen this happen many times. I've seen a common pattern where somebody becomes like head of household when one of their parents passes away when they're a teenager, and those people are way more mature because they're getting like, I'm helping my younger siblings out. They're having that life experience that other people don't have earlier. And if they also reflect on it, they get more mature, right? The one thing that you can't get without time passing is you don't get to see like macro cycles of society, right? As you get a little older, you realize that like roughly every like 10, 12 years, you get this is the most important election of all time election. Everybody gets worked up over it, right? And you also start seeing economic cycles of like the sky is freaking falling 2008. Some of them are a little worse. Some of them are like really nothing. But like seeing people go through like a mass cycle. And like if you haven't experienced it, if you like you weren't around, you were an adult in 08, like you don't remember, people like the sky is falling. What if everything shuts down? What if the world as we know it ends? It was like and like now we look at that and we're like, oh, okay, like whatever. Stock market went down 50%. There's an economic crash. Some people lost their jobs. They got like other jobs. Like the economy recovered. Some things didn't. Some regulations changed. Like whatever. Like that's how it goes. Right. So I think sometimes it takes some data and some experiences to be able to do this, but abstracting the values and saying like, okay, for me personally, if I'm unable to assess between which of these two options, right, is better, even once I get all the factual profile down, right? The 10% shot of a million or guaranteed 50,000, right, might be like, how much do I benefit from certainty? Right? How much does like failure adversely affect me? Right? How much do I care about momentum? So you want to name stuff in a way that matters for you and makes sense for you. But like you can abstract out, especially once you've kind of simplified things with some tautologies, and like by all means get the data, what are your odds of success and stuff like that. This is like important, right? But then saying like, okay, like if I could like take a side job, or I could like work on a novel that might or might not sell. I got some time. I want to do some creative output. Do I want to go work for a magazine doing like okay stuff? I want to write, but like do I want to work for a magazine, get paid a little bit, or do I want to like work on a novel that's more challenging, might be no economic return, might be more difficult at times, and so on and so forth. You might like at the end of the day boil that down to how much do I care about like artistic expression and like the freedom of artistic expression on my own? How much do I want to like work by myself? A lot of people that like writing but don't actually get books written don't actually like working by themselves, and like it takes people like a long time to realize that, and that's okay. You can actually like collaborate on things with people if you go look for it, but like that's okay, right, as a trade-off. And then how much do I care right now about like resources, and like it's perfectly fine to say like I care about resources. I've often chosen, when I had a choice to do an art project, science project, or something like that, and to get more resources, I've often chosen the art or science project. But I've also said like, hey, for this year, I'm like just like absolutely optimizing my finances. I took 1 year of my life like that, where I was just like, I'm going to cut my spending as low as possible. I'm going to earn as much money as possible. I'm going to have like some savings. I'd done a couple of bad investments around that point and got like kind of leveraged in the real estate thing, and just got really leveraged on that, and then it like didn't work. So like my finances went from like great to like not great. And I spent like a year of just like, hey, I'm gonna pay off all my bills. I'm gonna live really like disciplined for like a year, cut all my spending down, and earn for a year. And like I've done that. And like I think those are fine trade-offs. The ability to abstract out the difference between a magazine and a novel, right? Like, okay, like here's the tautologies. In this one, like there's deadlines. In this one, there's not deadlines. In this one, I'm reporting some of the values of my work. In this one, there's not. In this one, I get the returns in small pieces. In this one, I get all of the returns, any financial returns, like later down the road. In this one, the returns are certain, they're bounded, you know, right? I'll get exactly my $300 per magazine contribution. I can't make the super, I'm the next Asimov, but I also can't get zero, right? In this one, I could be Asimov. I could also be a million other sci-fi writers that you've never heard of, right? So you evaluate all that, but then you can abstract that. How much do I benefit from certainty? How much do I want the freedom and the lack of creative constraints? How much do I like constraints and working with other people, and things like that? And so you can then identify those, and then it's a bit of intuition. A last thing that can be a very useful technique that I find can very help, and it's very hard to answer this. There's like no formula for it, but it's useful to have conceptually in your tool set, is defining a threshold. Is defining a threshold of saying like, hey, here's how much creative freedom I need, right? As opposed to like more or less, right? Obviously with income, that's really, really valuable. For a lot of people, you know, there's like some level of income that's like really quite important to them and then like falls off, right? But you can also do this for things like novel experiences. What's my threshold? Like, what's the minimum? And like, this is where like learning about yourself helps. But like, how often do I need to do something new without getting to not get bored? Like roughly, do you know what I mean? Because like there's some number, like even the most like daredevilish people don't need to do 2 new things a day every single day or they go crazy. Do you know what I mean? But for most people, if they like novelty at all, right? Do need to do something new every so often and like figuring out what that is, right? So saying like, hey, if I take this, you know, if I take this job in a remote mining town or an oil field or whatever, right? Am I going to get my threshold? Right? So instead of like, oh, more novelty or less novelty, it's like, hey, am I going to get my threshold of novelty? Are the breaks and the time away from that? Is there either stuff in that area that I can bring with me? Like, could I bring a mountain bike or a motorcycle or an ATV to get some of that there if that's the kind of thing I want? And also like, are my breaks and my time off in this remote area enough that, you know, if you want to go to the theater, meet new people or do something interesting, am I getting enough of that a threshold? Cool. We can do questions. We can explore.
If anyone has any questions, give it another 15 or so minutes. Feel free to pop something in the chat or just pop your hand up. One question that's coming to mind, Sebastian, was thinking about this kind of construct of whether it's industrial philosophy or bespoke applied science and kind of the meta skill there. And if this were to be taught, in a course or something like that. So you mentioned, so just to summarize some of the stuff that you said and how I understood it. So to make these life decisions, there's like the 3 like broad principles that apply to most of them is having the sensitivity of statistics, identifying tautologies, and then value trade-offs. And it seems like a 4th one is having a toolbox of different models and techniques that are used in industry that can be applied to life, like winner's equity, expected value, diminishing returns, and so forth. So would you say that those 3 or 4 things would be part of the curriculum of learning bespoke applied science?
Yes. Yep.
Cool. We've developed curriculum for everyone. For
here's where I like the Stoa and just like a lot of the rest of the world. So one of my issues with curriculums, right? One of my issues with curriculums is, so education, but I think this is also a useful thing. Sometimes knowing the historical facts of something, by the way, is just very, very useful. As an amateur historian, there's like very little value in history, practical value for like a while. And then you're like, oh, this is a pattern. This is why this happened this way. And like, this might recur. So like once you get above some threshold in history, it's like quite valuable, right? And sometimes just knowing the history of something, right? Like, hey, like in the United States, it says Congress shall pass no bill abridging freedom of speech. Like, wait a second, like the state of California is not Congress. The president's not Congress. Like, how come these rules apply to them? like there's like an answer to that. It's the incorporation doctrine in the United States. Most people haven't heard of it. It's like one of the most important things that happened in U.S. history, right? Is like these have been incorporated because it's through the thing or whatever. Incorporation doctrine on Wikipedia, if anyone's curious, right? But sometimes it's really useful to know how things happened. I think it's very, very important to recognize that education, classical education, was almost entirely the domain of very wealthy people and specifically focused on how to handle a social and political career and how to handle in the Western tradition lawsuits. No, yeah. No, seriously. It was like you're having an argument about somebody where the border of your farmland ends and theirs begins, right? So all of the geometry and rhetoric and stuff like that. And there was some like the kids get bored, so let's do some music too or whatever, I guess. You know what I mean? Like, but you need to remember that. And you need to remember that education changed. Like there's an actual answer as to how the education system got how it is. People just like grouse about it, but like there's an actual answer. And that's that certainly in the West tradition in the United States and England and most of continental Europe, and a lot of this got adopted by the rest of the world, it was something called the Prussian education system or the Prussian education model, right? So the Prussians figured out basically how to make everybody a pretty good soldier or a pretty good factory worker, and that's the school system. Like I'm not making this up and I'm not actually throwing shade at it, I'm simplifying, but that's like actually what happened. Prussian education system is the key word there, right? So these things on like obedience, hierarchy, the teacher gives you an assignment, you do the assignment as specified, right? And you don't do whatever you want in school and you don't go where your curiosities lie. You do what you're told. Well, that makes you a factory worker and that makes you a good soldier. I mean, not a great person in factory, not a great soldier, but it establishes a baseline. And the Prussians were very successful. Prussia was one of many German states. And there's something called the unification of Germany that I really think would be accurate to call it like the Prussian conquest of Germany. Like, I think this would be like not wrong because like the Prussians were the unifiers and were in charge afterwards. And you didn't really have a say in the matter. You know what I mean? Like, you know, right? The fact that like they made it a decent deal for everybody and they went along and there wasn't a lot of shooting involved was like a nice benefit, I suppose. But like the idea that like everyone's like, you know, let's get together and put the Prussians in charge of Hanover, it's like, that's not what happened. As far as I can tell, right? There's 3 wars of unification with Prussia, and only one of them was Germans on Germans, Germany versus Austria, and there's the first one, there's Germany versus France at the end. So the Prussian education system, we're so steeped in it, and like so many fundamental assumptions that we have mean that we oftentimes like accidentally replicate that. Do you know what I mean? So you talk about a course or curriculum, right? Something that I'm a very, very, very big believer in is timing on learning. Like you should learn things in the right window where you're inclined to them, right? Because when you have a domain that's an imminent, interesting problem for yourself to apply a given statistical technique or a scientific technique to, or computer programming technique or skill set to, or some mathematical skills, then it's easy, cheap, delightful, exciting, thrilling. And like, you know, there's a joke in our social circle. It's kind of fading away the last few years, but there's like a big joke like 5 years ago that like, this is all with love. So like nobody quote me out of context and make me sound like a big jerk or something. It was with love, but we are throwing some shade a little bit, that people would say they're going to learn to code, capital L, capital T, capital C, learn to code. As opposed to like learning to code, which is cool. No, learn to code with a capital L, capital T, capital C. We're going to learn to code. It's like almost everybody that's really, really good at programming or engineering started because they got really curious and found a problem that they wanted to solve. The computer programming was a way to solve it. Not everybody, but almost everybody. There's a few people that like just like fell in love with the beauty of the mathematics, the numbers and stuff, but they're also not in a learn to code camp. Do you know what I mean? With capital L, capital T, capital C, right? So like really what you want to do if you want to learn to code is like you want to find a problem that's amenable to solving using programming. And then you want to solve it using programming. And like, you're not going to go down the standard track, right? And like, that's fine. If you want to do it as vocational training, the world needs a lot of programmers. It's like a well-paying field, whatever, fine. But like, you want to be like great at the stuff. It's like you get really into home automation, you start geeking out. right? And you start saying, okay, I can automate my home, I can set these things. Oh, like I would like my heat to come on if the weather temperature is predicted to be this, not even the thermostat, right? So like, how would I get the weather data and have the thermostat read the weather data? Oh, I'm gonna need like some sort of like API calls. Maybe I need a server, maybe I don't. It's interesting. I don't really want a server, right? Like that's how you really fall in love with it. If you're like, that's dreadfully boring if you're not into it, and like very interesting if you're into it. Some financial systems automation is like very interesting if you're into it, and not if you're not into it. So, my issue with things like these, and where I often will say, hey, here's like a grab bag of stuff, get into it, is because like all roads lead to Rome, right? Like I always recommend for people when they're learning history to go really deep on one thing that really excites them to start, right? Because like learning how to like, hey, like how do I overview like primary source documents in history? Like how do I find the memos that like George Washington wrote and like read those? That's like part of being a good historian, is like, don't just read some jerk's opinions, including mine. Like I'm some jerk, like go like look at what George Washington, I quote George Washington if I write about him quite a bit, but like, I like read, he wrote a book on etiquette, by the way. George Washington wrote or like made some notes on a book on etiquette. And it was things like, don't put your feet in the fire in a tavern if someone's cooking in the fire. Like he had to write this down because his like American junior soldiers and officers would like do idiot stuff to offend people. And like when you're fighting a revolutionary war, like offending the local population is like really bad. So like George Washington put out a book on etiquette, right? Finding that and then reading it is part of being a historian. It's not that good, by the way. It's like, okay, it's interesting. It's a historical document. Like it really doesn't apply. There's some things about like how not to insult people and stuff, but like you can get it in any, you get it better in more modern self-help books, right? But it was really interesting as a historical document of like when meat is being cooked, it's okay to put your boots in the fire. Don't laze and have your hips flared out as if you're lazing in front of the fire either. It's like funny, right? It's an interesting historical document. Well, you can learn how to find that historical document, or you can learn how to find the historical documents about the Apollo project if you're interested in spaceflight. And for older stuff, like primary sources are harder to get and it's harder to verify. So like Caesar almost certainly wrote the commentaries in the Gallic Wars, but then the second set of Caesar's commentaries, just not sure if they're Caesar or not. So like, how do you think about authenticity? It really doesn't matter which historical era you learn to be a historian on. It's very different in the modern, lots of data and good records versus like way back in the day. But like starting on whatever one's just like really exciting for you, doesn't feel like work, you're just like hungry for it, is the way to be a historian. I hated history in school. They made us learn certain things. Many of them I didn't care about, right? So I suppose that's my only objection to a curriculum is, I guess some people in the meta, and I think Peter, you and I are like this, and probably a lot of people in the Stoa are like this, so this would be okay, right? I think some people are just meta interested in learning and skill building and adding techniques to their repertoire. So that'll work for us, right? If you said like, hey, Sebastian, I just did like a deep overview of like 50 mathematical principles with practical application. I look at the list, I know like 7 of them, I don't know the other 43. You're like, you want to do it with me? I'd be like, yeah, sure, sign me up, right? But I think a lot of people that would risk grinding out their love of learning that could be activated domain specific. And so for me, if I'm doing any mentoring, whether that's a staff member or like a young person that I connect with, maybe a friend of mine's, like an older friend of mine's adult child or something, I'm always looking for like, what are their interests and like, how do we get them very cheaply to get the lessons in like a very practical way. So that was my only hesitation. When you asked the question, I hesitated. I thought about it for a second. Is you could absolutely curricumize it, but ideally you pick the tools for the job that you currently want to do, and you master those tools in like a practical way with a lot of excitement and enthusiasm, and that builds a lot of momentum, which can then, if you find 4 cool statistical techniques and they're really useful, then maybe you have an inherent love of statistical techniques at that point, and then you just add them and just blitz through statistics courses. But as like a starting point, I'm always going to want to say like, what problems does somebody actually want to solve? And then like, what are the right tools for that? And then learn those tools to solve those problems is my preferred way of doing things. Again, there's a few people that just love learning and meta learning and adding to their repertoire. That's cool. Anything will work for them. But for most people, including even people like us, if you have a project that calls for something, you know what I mean? If you're actually doing a piece of writing that you want to be really, really good, learning editing techniques and poetics and stuff is easier than if you're just like learning it for no reason and doing like made up assignments. So that's my one caveat there. But besides that, yeah, absolutely.
And my response is yeah, it's like this, the hidden curriculum, what they call it in sociology, the hidden curriculum of something, the non-intended like norms, values, or beliefs that get conveyed alongside the intentional material being taught. So for example, like, you know, they teach you how to be a compliant 9-to-5er by going to school. And this ethos of just-in-time learning does allow for this emergent talent stack to meet reality, so you can be like agentic in it. And I guess my why I geek out of like skill constructs, like a bespoke applied science or whatever, it's almost like an invitation for someone to see the wonders of learning. Because if they want to learn something often, they go take a course, and I think they intuit this hidden curriculum that's at play, and then all the like the scripts and stuff that's not needed in order to get like that minimum viable skill that, you know, that apply the 80-20 towards getting it. And then you gestured earlier, like, I don't know why people don't know more about this stuff, because I think that's the barrier there. So I'm curious if anything emerged for you with that share.
Yeah. I mean, if we're going to be really frank about it, and people are often not frank about it because it can get them into trouble, but I'm quite a sincere person, and I'll pick my words kind of carefully here. There's a lot of very different types of people in the world. There's a lot of very, very, very different types of people in the world. And the ideal for somebody that's, so first off, there's some people that have like just like brutal, grinding, horrible circumstances, and the doors aren't open to them, and you need to like fix material problems for them. You know, if somebody's got like heavy, like deeply malaria, you know, in their family, they got malaria, whatever, they can't learn and stuff. Right now, they're like laid up in bed, sweating and feverish. Once that's met and somebody's materially safe and sound and whatever, and there are a lot of people in the world that are not very curious. Do you know what I mean? There are a lot of people that don't want to learn and see it as kind of a bit of an imposition and a hassle to learn. And I think recognizing that is not too unprogressive or nasty. Like I don't think that's a bad thing to acknowledge, and I think it can make somebody a better communicator, a better educator, a better manager, a better colleague. When you realize that. There was there's a line of joke. I adopted this from somebody else, somebody else's joke originally, I forget who, but I adopted it. It's like you go to a college. So I did some nonprofit and education work back in the day. I've spoken or engaged with a lot of the top universities in the world, and I didn't actually do this, but it's very easy to imagine this happening, right? Is you go to a talk and you say, hey, who in here loves learning? Everybody like, oh, me, I love learning, right? It's like, okay, cool. We're doing an overviews and fundamentals of organic chemistry right after this. It'll be about like 3 hours. It's like pretty intense. Like, just go sign your name up there. No, like people like say they love learning. They like learning things that are like fun and easy and not challenging and don't put you under strain. So, and this is something where I think you do a wonderful job, Peter, and I was really just thrilled and delighted to be invited here. I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity to come here. Is you've done something really remarkable, and everybody here has collectively built it, and I think everybody should be very proud of that, where it's like a space where people can really deeply engage in things that are challenging and also like put them into practice. A lot of people say they like learning, but they really kind of, it's not that they like want to be entertained or like get a surface level thing or other, but a lot of times what people say when they like learning is I don't know, it's not pure learning, because like there really are some concepts in the world. There's some statistic stuff that is like, if I like sat you down and like we just kept working on those problems and did 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 of them, you would understand it at the end of it, and it's really useful. But there's no like chatting about it. It's like meditation, right? Like you can't chat about meditation. Like you can if you've done a bunch of it already, you know, right? And like, or you can if you've got an underpinning in neuroscience. But like for somebody else, it's just like all right, sit there. Why? It's like, yeah, you'll see. right? Like, so, you know, talking about, it's like, for who is the question that I would put to you, right? Is like, for who, right? Because if somebody's sufficiently motivated and sufficiently, like, almost like hungry to really deeply understand reality, then any methodology will work. Some of them are better or worse. If they're not hungry, then how do you get them hungry is the first question. And usually people will be hungry on either things that are actually pressing problems that learning will actually help them solve, that they actually want to solve. Some people like have problems they don't actually want to solve, they just want to express that they have them. But if somebody actually wants to solve a problem, like for real, right, that'll get them on it. Or every now and then, it's just like a bizarre, wonderful thing about humans. Like, we just like fall in love with something. So we just get like really into jazz music for whatever reason, unexpectedly. And then, you could bootstrap that into either more music related stuff like playing or understanding, or music theory, or even mathematics or mass communications, or how information is stored in code. If somebody's really into like audio quality, it's like, oh, how did vinyl records get created, cassette tapes and stuff, and like that bootstraps people's understanding into these fields that would otherwise be kind of boring and technical. So yes, maybe we could arbitrarily define the world using some of the stuff we just talked about into, there's like groups of people where like philosophic inquiry is really just not viable for them. They just got a tough spot materially. And that's where like, like, world's improving rapidly, medicine, food, all sorts of stuff, still not where everybody would like it to be, right? So there's that. I'm not talking about that. Once people are in a materially safe, decent, whatever ground condition, look, there's people that inherently want actual learning, where they like actually like demonstrably have new stuff added to their repertoire. They can do new things. They want new capabilities, and they will work for them. And there are people that are in that state like fairly often, and there's people that are in that state rather rarely, right? And so when we talk about any like learning of this, it's like, are we talking about for the first type of people, or are we talking about for the second type of people? Because I think the derivations are like, you can see why like people don't talk about this. I feel like a lot of people know this, right? I've talked to some really good teachers. Like, everybody knows this, but it just kind of like, it's not like, yeah, like it doesn't get people, you know what I mean? It's like, it doesn't make you sound good. And it potentially, if you're not careful, makes you sound really bad, and just like bums everybody out, right? And I'm comfortable saying it here because like it's here, right? And I'm also comfortable, like I'm just a little more comfortable like saying things that are true than other people, though I still believe in discretion quite a bit. I don't believe in ruffling feathers for no reason. And I'm also saying it just like in a very pro-social way. If anybody like doesn't acknowledge that there's like highly motivated and hungry people around like learning and improvement and techniques and such, and then there are people that aren't, like, you're going to be so miscalibrated with reality if you don't realize that. For anybody that want to actually, and people have seen this where they like learn something amazing, they want to tell their friends about it, right? And sometimes it's really simple, like download this app, like, dude, it's really useful, it's going to save you a ton of time. Like, I don't know, it's like, dude, freaking do it right now, like, give me your phone, I'm downloading the app for you. Like, this particular one is just really useful for this annoying thing you're doing. And like sometimes you have to like beat people over the head for that, you know what I mean? So I think that's some of the challenge is who for whom, for whom. And I think within the Stoa, yeah, let's absolutely maximize, right? But it also can be like the Stoa. I'm not sure we need a curriculum per se. Might be useful, might speed things up, right? But I'm not sure it's needed when you have a group of people like this. If you have a group of people that are, more like not like this, I'm not sure it'll get the job done by itself, and that's a bigger problem. I've thought about this a lot. It's tricky. Anyways, pardon me if I'm bumming everybody out or saying things that sound not maximally pro-social. I mean it all pro-socially.
Maybe I'll share one more thing. I was going to share my screen. Okay, I'll share this in the chat. The screen's not working. You know that guy that created a super memo?
Yeah.
He's a really cool like wiki, and he has all these terms and stuff. And he has something called the learn drive versus school drive. There's that. Couldn't share my screen, but they had a cool graphic. Basically, the school drive like traumatizes people, creates learned helplessness, and then he argues that the learn drive is just like that natural force to really want to learn. And I think people who come to the store, drawn to a place like this, just have or tapped into that learn drive. I think with the second category of people, I think that learn drive is there, but got like repressed, especially in school with the hidden curriculums, maybe they didn't do well, and then they couldn't keep up, but they really wanted to learn it. So I think there might be a segment of people who just don't seem like they want to learn, that could learn, but might need some help prompting there. Hence my interest of sort of emancipating this skill set from school and institutions and school drive.
To abstract, I agree with you, and I think probably it's probably something like the people that are like high curious, really inquisitive. I haven't studied this yet, but this class of thing, there's probably like on the order of somewhere between like, I don't know, probably not less than 4x and probably not more than like 15x as many people that have the strong, genuine learning drive that could, in the right environment, fit in with that. You look at the various special forces compared to the regular military. Very, very interesting. Special forces are like highly selected, super elite, super tough, right? But they're also much more informal. Like a bunch of like regulatory things of like your boots need to be shined, you got to be closely shaven, your hair cut and stuff. All those restrictions get relaxed. So all of these like external markers of discipline, which one of the reasons to do that is it's very hard to know if somebody's gun is clean, but very easy to see if their boots are shined, right? So given that cleaning your gun is more important than shining your boots, presumably if your boots are clean, then your gun is clean as well, right? Special forces are like so good and so on it that they don't need to have their boots shine. They can have dirty boots and like a grungy beard and stuff and still be elite because they're so professional and they're so on it. What's very interesting for me is almost certainly, I think this is, I think people would agree with this. I think people in that world would agree with this. There's people that like, had they not gotten into a special forces unit, would have been like an idiot and a screw up in the regular military. But like they're around a culture of extreme performance. Everybody's expected to be really, really, really good. But they're not being like arbitrarily told what to do. The hierarchical, the officers are bossing around the enlisted people like capriciously is at the lowest level in the special forces as to any military, from my understanding, right? So there's people that like, if they wind up in the right environment, could do that, so there's some lone geniuses like Isaac Newton types that will be a lone genius no matter what. And then you see these like flourishing intellectual movements in a particular city at a particular time where something pops off in Venice or in Paris or in San Francisco or in New York or many other places in Shanghai and Calcutta, whatever. So there's a lot of people that if there's like a critical mass of culture, they might not have had the drive so strong and the ability to go against the grain and handle stress and pressure and people not understanding you to such an extreme extent, right? That if there's a critical mass of people that are cool, that you can roll with and that you can share ideas with each other and things like that, people that would have been in like the Royal Society in England, right? Then you can go for it. So yeah, I do agree with you. I do think there are still some percentage of people that like, look, avoiding pain and strain and difficulty is more important to them than the glorious, beautiful, whatever. And I think that's okay. When I was younger, I used to think, I was very judgmental. I used to think those people are like defective or something, right? And it's like, look, there's some people that just want to like have a decent life that's not a problem and like give them every opportunity to participate in learnings, like make sure the door's cracked open for them and they didn't just get discouraged by the education system or whatever, but they might not walk through the door and that's totally okay. Having something on the order of 4x to 15x, the number of people that are deeply curious and deeply engaged with reality and deep things, collaborating with each other, working with each other, sharing with each other is already monumental. I really feel like every incremental person that gets quote unquote on it and participates in trying to do interesting stuff and make the world a better place doesn't just make themselves more effective and happier, but they have knock-on effects to everybody they influence around them by being more effective and calm and cool and having things in a good state. And then they also can bring their expertise and their experience to other people they interact with. They can recognize each other's mutual virtue and share and exchange and have the whole be great in some of its parts. So I think every single person that gets on it, so to speak, is incredibly valuable. And yeah, I think really very conservatively, there could be at least 4x as many people like that in the world, and like one of the paths there is to create a space. It's interesting. Almost all of them have been city based, right? Almost all of them have been city or geography based, and you're kind of doing it virtually, which is very interesting. It wasn't possible before, really. There's some antecedents of like write-in math puzzle things. By the way, there's some interesting ones. That reminds me, I should. There's one. People that did mathematical puzzles together that actually like math research came out of. I believe they were published in Scientific American. I'll look it up for you and I'll send it to you, Peter, because that might be an early antecedent of more specialized STOA before the information technology got good enough. But yeah, excellence. Absolutely. In the chat, we got excellence. We're in Greek down there, so for the win. But yeah.
Yeah, very cool. This could be we can continue this conversation next week. It might be even a good STOA session by itself. I definitely know this skill that you have. I want to get better at it. I know a lot of people want to get better at it, but they're intimidated by it and they don't know where to start. Like, how could it be taught or presented in such a way that's inviting, that invokes that learn drive? So I'll share Sebastian's notes to those watching the video, and then next week, I think it's just a big Q&A. Is that right, Sebastian?
Yeah, we could talk a little bit. I would love, maybe we even just title this like hyper practical, bring whatever you're working on that you want to have go a little better, and let's see if we can identify the lines and the variables and the trade-offs around it. We can apply some of the techniques. A lot of times I think good problem solving doesn't even need to be prescriptive. It doesn't need to be advice. It could be just descriptive. You could do it this way or that way. You know what I mean? Like, hey, there's only 2 ways to do this. It's this way or that way using a tautology, right? You could either do this all in one go, or you could do it incrementally. You know what I mean? In some degrees of increment. It's like, that's a tautology. That's like you're doing it in one sitting or not one sitting. Do you know what I mean? So helping people find some of those lines. So if people want to bring practical things, projects, career related, as I said in the beginning, I will shy away from sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and probably mass politics as well. But no, that's just me. I'm a little, whatever. I am a CEO of a mainstream company ish, so I gotta have some degree of propriety, a little bit, right? But yeah, people just want to bring practical problems we can do, just applied problem solving for the rest of the time, if that's useful. It's kind of your call. I got through everything that I absolutely would have been like disappointed if I didn't do. I've got more, but I did everything that I'm going to be disappointed if I didn't do with today was some of the unification stuff of how do you then start to apply scientific techniques of like you identify where this isn't a factual statistical thing, right? And then you can look at the trade-offs on that. That's the start of that. But yeah, like we can make it hyper practical next time, or really whatever people would really enjoy and find useful. It's January. Probably a lot of people are past the threshold where like either some great changes are underway for the year, or this year's starting to look a lot like last year. Do you know what I mean? So if there's any like kind of give people a little jump start, might be cool. But yeah, just whatever's most useful. Can go deep, can go practical, can do Q&A as you like. So we can communicate. You and I can communicate about that and settle on the final things as we wrap.
Beautiful. So if you're listening on YouTube, do check it out, and I'll post this on the Substack. I'll make some closing announcements. But Sebastian, thank you once again for coming to the STOA and for this excellent session. And next up at the STOA, I'm going to be hosting an event that's going to be a bookless club at the STOA, and the theme is becoming wise in public. So it's riffing off the Learn in Public movement that got started with this article about essentially like being 2 chapters ahead and creating a platform on learning. One of the best ways to learn is to teach. How can we do that with wisdom, though? And so that's what we're going to muse on. So you can check out on the stoa.ca. We're going to talk about second selves and hypersigils and all this stoa-esque stuff. So be sure to check it out. So that being said, Sebastian, everyone, thanks so much for coming to STOA.